High school can be tough. We'll help you navigate some of the areas you need help with, including the college preparation process by providing advice for families. Every student is different and has a unique path. That's why we created this podcast. Our innovative and intentional approach builds confidence in the individual student. Listen each week to find out how students can score better on college placement tests with techniques and methods that build confidence, beat test anxiety, and identify strengths within each student. You're listening to Simply Smarter with hosts Caleb and Jill. Check out our blog at GetSmarterPrep.com for more college prep related topics.
The ACT is very different than all the other tests in high school. Students may take the test and feel overwhelmed with the way test makers phrase the questions and run out of time in different sections. On today's episode, we discussed in detail every section of the ACT, what it covers, what students tend to struggle with in specific sections, different tips for each portion, and then compare the ACT to the SAT. Guess what day it is?
Podcast day?
It is. And National Name Yourself Day.
Awesome. I forgot about that. Remember earlier? I'm going to go by Jill today.
Yeah, I'm going by Caleb. I'm going to talk like Caleb.
Is that what I sound like?
No, actually.
It could be. Everybody hates the sound of their own voice, and
yeah.
I kind of hated that voice you just
I'm
made.
so sorry.
I'm just kidding.
No offense, please. Also, National Unicorn Day.
Yeah.
I feel like my 9-year-old daughter would be really excited about that.
Yeah, unicorns have become really big over the last few years. Where did that come from?
Yeah, we had like a swan unicorn for a pool blow up last summer.
A swan unicorn?
Yeah, it took up almost the whole pool.
Why do swans also have to be unicorns? Isn't that...
Why not? Is the better question. Why not? You put a horn on anything
weird.
and it's a unicorn.
That is true. What about something with a horn, like a rhino? Could you have a rhino unicorn?
Yeah, put some glitter on it.
The glitter is the key. I get it.
I think so. Color and glitter.
I like it.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. I'm glad we know today is National Unicorn Day.
It is. It's exciting. It's a good day for everyone. So if you're having a bad day, just think of a happy little unicorn. His little horn is glittery. It's just full of color, and it's spreading happy glitter everywhere.
Wow.
Happy day.
Happy day. I feel like this could be the mascot for the ACT. Right?
Yes.
That would make people thank you. That'd make people a little less intimidated.
Oh,
They'd actually find the ACT more enjoyable, maybe.
That's a good
maybe
point.
Maybe not.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah, right.
Because it is different than regular high school tests, right?
So true. Mm-hmm. Right? So in school, we're actively learning the material, and we are being tested on that material.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes, what you just learned.
Sometimes that's a good thing for students who kind of cram last minute and have that short-term memory, because then the test is over. But the ACT is a little bit more like a final, maybe. Mm-hmm. And even some teachers will actually do multiple choice finals, right? Yep. Because guess what? It's too late for you to learn the material any longer.
Right.
Semester's over. Mm-hmm. You're moving on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the ACT, right? They don't care if you can show your work and do it the certain way. It's about getting to that correct answer, and that's what really matters.
It's just about the correct answer.
So we'll really kind of focus in on that piece and help students and families better understand what the test is about and how to best approach it.
Right, and we're really going to dig into each specific section on the ACT today, kind of go over the timing, what it covers, what students struggle with. I mean, you have tutored for a number of years, so you know a lot what they specifically struggle with in each section. And then Kayla was also going to give a couple tips for each section of the test. So we're going to test him and see if he can give us some good tips, because what is today? April 9th, right? April 9th.
That sounds right.
But the April 13th test is coming
just
up
4 days away.
Our students.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Man, and this season has just been strange. Here in Kansas, we've had the February ACT national test date, and then we're supposed to have the state assessment on February 20th. Mm-hmm. Well, that got pushed to April 2nd. So we just had that last week, and now we're into the April 13th exam. Yeah.
So some students are taking April 2nd and April 13th.
Yeah, some are. That's a lot.
Whew.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
Kudos to them.
Okay, so let's start in the English section. English, math, reading, science. English is always first.
Always the first section. You open up to it.
Yep.
And this section is basically made up of 75 questions, and a student has 45 minutes to complete it.
Well, that seems like a lot of questions, not that much time.
Not that much time. The flow of this section usually goes pretty well.
Okay.
There are maybe about 5% of students who have troubles with timing of the English section, so it's not as big of an issue. So if you're having those issues with timing, there are definitely ways to approach that a little bit differently and not get sucked in. Don't focus on the passage as a whole, because 95% of the questions have nothing to do with the big picture on the English there. So making sure that we're kind of zeroing in and making sure we're understanding the question. That's kind of getting to one of my tips here in just a little bit. But
hold on, Caleb. Hold on with the tip. Let's just talk about what it covers. So it covers idioms, punctuation, pronouns, verbs, rhetoric content, and rhetoric style.
Yeah. So what are some of those things, right? Like, what are idioms?
I mean, we know what punctuation, here's a comma, here's an apostrophe,
right.
Pronouns, verbs. We kind of have those.
A good sense, yeah.
Right. So what about an idiom?
So an idiom is a good example of an idiom is, so those of you who have taken Spanish, and I haven't taken Spanish for a very, very long time.
Sí, señor.
But Jill, how do you say I'm hungry in Espanol?
Tengo hambre.
Tengo hambre. So what does the verb tener mean?
Yeah, to have.
To have. So they're literally saying I have hunger. Well, if I said that to you,
I didn't know this was going to be a Spanish test.
Right? This is crazy, right? If I said, hey, I have hunger, you'd look at me like I'm kind of weird.
Really?
Like, that's a strange way of saying.
You mean you're hungry?
That's an idiomatic expression, right?
Okay.
So most of the time on the ACT, they're covering just the way that we use verbs or prepositions in particular. The most common idiom that we know here in the U.S. is "it's raining cats and dogs."
Oh,
and if you translate it to any other language, you are going to confuse the crap out of people, right? They're just not going to have any idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, they're going to head indoors.
Right. Right. So true. Huh. Yeah. I just imagine everybody going inside in Italy or something.
Or, if you really like dogs and cats, you just head outside and hold your arms out.
Just get them. Get those cats and dogs.
Cat lovers. I'd be a cat lover.
Yeah, that's fair.
I like dogs, but if you throw a kitten at me,
oh, shoot.
arms are open.
Oh, shoot.
Okay, what about rhetoric content and rhetoric style? Those seem very similar. What's the difference?
So there are two other big ways that they test kind of how test the verbiage and communication on the English section. The first is that rhetoric style. And in rhetoric style, they're really kind of helping, they're really targeting a certain way that they want things phrased.
Okay.
Right? So this is a good example of where we wouldn't recommend that a student prepare for both the ACT and SAT, right? Because the way that the test makers are wanting something worded may be slightly different, or the emphasis that they put on things could be different, right?
Okay.
So that ACT, the test makers just really love active voice. Passive voice is not grammatically incorrect. It's just maybe not as clear and concise, and that's really one of the things that ACT loves, right? And there will be anywhere from 8 to 12 questions that are purely rhetoric style, and just knowing what they're looking for there can go a long way.
Okay.
The rhetoric content are a little bit different. Those are going to be where there's an actual question in this section. Most of the time, you just have something underlined in the passage, and you can either leave it with no change, or they give 3 other options that you can replace it with, right? So these rhetoric content ones are typically the questions where they're asking, hey, where should this sentence be placed within the paragraph? If we delete this, what do we lose? Just that kind of stuff that's kind of that placement, order, what does this part mean? Just kind of testing those kind of ideas.
I feel like that might be the hardest part of the English section. Is that true? Or some people just get it, some people don't?
Initially that can be a really big challenging section. And there are anywhere from 18 to 20 of these kinds of questions on each exam. So if students really struggle with those, or again, maybe they get caught up in the wordiness of the questions, then it can be easy to make those mistakes. But once you learn like what they're really about, and you focus in, and we talk a lot about lead words in the reading section, but this applies in this portion of the English section as well. As if we know what they're asking, we can answer that question more successfully.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What I tell my students all the time is sometimes they're going to ask you a really stupid question, like it's kind of painful, and you can't correct the paragraph or the passage in the way that makes it the best in your opinion. you have to answer their stupid question with a stupid answer.
Stupid
right?
answer.
They have to match.
Wait, I thought there was no such thing as a stupid question.
Sometimes there are stupid questions on the ACT.
Debunked.
Debunked. I like it. No. So those are the kind of the two sections that a lot of students don't really have a full grasp on going in. But even punctuation, like it seems so straightforward and simple.
Right.
Like we all know what a comma is and what a period is. But
when did you learn that?
Right, like elementary school, right?
Yeah.
Or verbs. We learned that in elementary school,
8th
right?
grade. Yeah.
So, but many of us don't use semicolons in our writing, right?
I find that those are really tricky.
I love semicolons.
Is it a colon? Is it a semicolon? I don't know.
Here's the quick tip. This isn't even the one I was planning to give away.
I'm ready for it.
If you have a semicolon and a period on the same as answer choices and the verbiage is the same on both sides of the punctuation, you can get rid of both on the ACT because they mean the same thing on the ACT. You can't have two correct answers, right?
Okay.
So you can get rid of them both. That's kind of beautiful and super simple.
Okay.
And you'll encounter that probably on anywhere from 2 to 5 questions on the ACT. So that's a win, right?
That's a definite win.
How about that?
I like it.
And then, of course, they do strange things with colons and dashes that our teachers in school would never approve of and would probably mark wrong on an essay. But on the ACT, they're technically correct.
Oh.
Yeah, like there are those technical rules. Like if you really dig in and you're a total grammar nerd, you'll realize, oh, that is true. Oh. But nobody uses it that way.
Oh, so. Shoot. Tricky.
Tricky.
I'm glad we could cover that.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome.
Those certain sections are the things that most students have troubles with. Is just that rhetoric content in particular. Actually, punctuation is where a lot of the misses fall there because it's pretty heavily tested on the ACT, anywhere from 18 to 22 questions.
That's a big chunk.
Pretty frequently we see that students miss up like half or more punctuation questions.
Oh wow!
And they look at those and they're like, oh shoot, what?
Yeah, I thought I was doing okay. I thought I knew this.
I know a comma.
Right.
But students tend to be pretty heavy, comma heavy when they're in their own writing. So that doesn't translate well to the ACT. Okay. So again, making those adjustments, knowing what you're looking for.
If in doubt, take out a comma.
Yeah, it's actually pretty true on the ACT. This is not English related, but I feel like I should throw this out there. Like,
go for it.
Again, we were talking about earlier the difference between tests in school and the ACT in particular. Like, think about all those tests your teachers make each semester, right? They make dozens of tests for all of their classes. They are really good at their jobs, but they don't have the resources and time and money and everything else to put into each test like these test makers do.
Right.
I mean, they can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars creating a single test. Like, they are very intentional, right?
Absolutely. That makes sense.
So sometimes in this English section or in math or reading or science, like sometimes you read a question, you're like, what? I think they messed up. I think they did something weird here.
That's one of those stupid questions.
Right. But sometimes, like, I've fallen for this way back in the day when I was the smartest 17-year-old in the world, right?
Of course.
We all thought we were the smartest.
Of course. I was.
I would get into a test and be like, oh, they meant to say something else. They didn't mean to do that. They spent so much money creating that test. Very intentional.
Yeah.
So don't take that for granted.
Yeah. What to look for.
Absolutely.
How to maneuver your way around it.
Yep. Absolutely. So in English, my big tip there is always start with that question or, again, with those answer choices in most cases, right? Because there isn't an actual physical question. And just ask yourself, what are they testing in this instance? If we can identify like what those words are, or what they're actually going for here, it can help lead us down the right path to getting the correct answer, right? If I identify that those are all verbs in the answer choices, they're testing verbs. Well, there's limited ways that they can test verbs. And it's probably going to be subject-verb agreement or verb tense. So you can kind of start zeroing in at that point.
Perfect. Process of elimination.
Yeah, absolutely. I love process of elimination.
That's a good tip. Thanks, Caleb. What about the math section? I feel like you either really like math and you're really good at math, or you hate math. Yeah. And I think we're on opposite sides of the table here. I love math. Oh, wait, just kidding. You love math.
Were you being Caleb again?
Yes, I was.
I knew it.
So not opposite dates. Name yourself today.
Right.
I start sweating when I have to do math problems. I don't like it. I get my phone out.
I get it.
when do you ever really use math?
This is a little shout out to my kid's sister. Like, oh my God. And my older brother, actually. Like, I remember I was terrified of math. Like,
You were?
I was terrified of math when I was in like elementary school.
Oh, like first
like
grade.
high school math, because my brother would like just have a terrible time with math. And I think some of it just goes back to the particular teacher that you have and how you learn that material and things like that. And then all of our brains are just wired differently, right? So I get it. Like, my sister hated geometry.
Oh, yeah.
The ironic part is she's now married to a math teacher. I kind of love that.
That's awesome.
Kind of great. But, this math section, most students probably dread it, at least in to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, like, if you're a good math student, you want to do the math.
Right.
And then your time gets killed.
But you don't have to show your work.
Necessarily.
You just
right?
need the correct answer.
Right. But the challenge with not showing your work sometimes is if you have fat
Little
thumb
mistakes.
syndrome, like I do, and you're punching in your calculator and you hit the wrong button or something,
Right.
like, now you've really made a mistake and now you're way off.
Yeah, that'd be hard.
And then frustrating, right?
Yeah. But in this section, you have 60 questions in 60 minutes.
Yeah.
1 minute per question.
Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Right. Not.
But not.
Because.
Well, lots of reasons. But the first one is this is the only section of the ACT that gets progressively more difficult.
Okay, so you're going to have the easier questions at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then the last, 5-10 questions are going to be pretty tricky.
Even more than that. I would say 15, 20, 25 questions
I would die.
Be pretty tricky.
Yeah.
Or at least the math seems straightforward, but there's like a trap. And you got to make sure you identify the trap and approach the question in the right way.
Where? So
you
where
almost
would
teared up just now.
I know. That's already hard enough. What do you mean? Where's the trap? Is it like halfway through, 3/4 of the way through? Where's this trap?
It depends. Depends on the question. Sometimes it's at the very beginning. It's about how we look at the question
throw me
initially.
off right away.
Or it could be like the last step. Maybe we just solve for the wrong thing because we have patterns and things that we've seen every day in school for the last however many years, and that's how we do things, and that's what we do, but that's not actually what they're asking for. So it can come any time along the way.
So
and it's just
tricky.
about thinking about the section a little bit differently.
Okay.
Right? I want to mention one other thing about the timing, right? If we try to go into this test spending a minute per question, you are going to be very, very frustrated at the end because the more difficult questions are just naturally going to take more time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're gonna hit a roadblock in there at some point.
So is there any questions towards the beginning that you're like, oh, yep, I don't even have to do my work. I know what this is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
There are going to be some things, and we teach some tendencies of the test makers, and if we can identify those trends, the things that they always do. So, for instance, everybody knows about the 3-4-5 triangle, or at least most students do, and it's a right triangle.
I do.
And it's a right triangle, and the side links are instead of ever having to do Pythagorean theorem again, they just know 3-4-5 triangles. And if you see that on the test, and you see one side that is 4, the long leg, and the hypotenuse is 5, guess what that other short leg is? It's 3.
Okay.
Right?
3. I was going to say that.
Yeah, I know. It was right on the tip of your tongue.
I was.
So we don't have to necessarily do the math into something like that. Just because we know what's coming, we can kind of beat the ACT at their own game there.
Okay, well, I like those little...
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Right, let's simplify it.
Yeah, let's just make it a little bit easier.
No,
it's not this big bad monster.
It isn't. It's not really that bad.
Have in my head.
And the other thing is, there will be 5, 8, maybe as many as 10 questions on the math section of the ACT where you don't really have to do any math to get the math question right. Okay. And that kind of corresponds with what I just talked about. Like, maybe we don't have to do Pythagorean theorem ever again, and maybe make a little mistake in there or whatnot. But maybe there are some new strategies, some new test-taking things that we can use to make sure that we're maximizing our score, right? And in school, students don't take multiple-choice math tests.
Right.
It's a terrible way to test our skills in math, right? Teachers want to see your work, and sometimes they'll be really nice and give students partial credit.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, right?
I always love that.
Even if you get the wrong answer, right?
Yeah.
You still get like half credit. That's a win.
Yeah.
But on the ACT, they don't care if you become a better math student. They're measuring something different at this specific moment in time. So we just have to kind of adjust to it. And sometimes for those really good math students, they have troubles adjusting. And then their time gets really crunched and they get frustrated. And the answer's not there that they just found.
Oh,
and
no.
they knew they did everything right. And So it's again, just making sure that we can analyze each question and figure out, like, how do I approach this question in a way that makes sense for this particular test?
Okay, so it's covering algebra, geometry, stats, and trig.
Yeah. And the stats, the student doesn't need like a statistics course in high school to get those. Most of those are mean, median, and mode.
Okay.
Probability that we learned back in the day.
I feel like that's kind of
There's
easy.
some permutations in there, things like that.
Yeah.
And they've actually been testing that a little bit more recently. There was a test just within the last year or so that had 10 stats related questions,
Really?
which is crazy.
That was really high.
A sixth of the test is
Yeah.
stats. That
Yeah.
was pretty wild. Generally, a little bit more than half is going to be algebra. A good chunk of that is algebra 2.
Algebra 2.
And then probably about a third generally is going to be geometry. And then there's anywhere from 2 to 6 questions that are related to trigonometry.
And those would be toward the end.
Not always.
Seems like that would be very hard.
Every once in a while they pop them into the first 15, but it's usually, if a student knows SOHCAHTOA, right? Do you remember that term at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. So at some point we've learned SOHCAHTOA.
SOHCAHTOA.
And it's just a way to remember how our trig functions are related and how we can solve for them. That is usually enough to get 90% of the trig questions correct.
Let's do it.
Simple, straightforward.
SOHCAHTOA.
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 There it is. You nailed it.
SOHCAHTOA.
She's on it, folks.
I'm learning so many things today.
This is great. So one of my big takeaways for students is to make sure that you slow down in the section, right? I preach this to my students over and over and over again. The ACT is a test of accuracy, not a test of completion. And then I have to repeat it again because usually they didn't listen or they missed
that
it
makes
to begin
sense.
with.
And they keep on going.
Right.
Wait, what? What does that actually mean?
Right. So, for instance, to get the national average on the math section of the ACT, you know how many questions you have to get correct out of 60?
Half.
You can get 50% and be at the national average for college-bound students.
Wow.
That's pretty wild, right?
That is.
So for a lot of students, they literally should only be focused on the first 30 questions and then use a good guessing strategy from there on out. Because if you could slow it down, not fall for the traps, not make mistakes in your math early on, and those easier questions, they're worth the same amount as those later questions.
Yeah, right.
So get as many points as you can.
Yeah.
Like if you can get 90% of the questions correct in the first 30 and you use a good guessing strategy, you're going to end up with a 22 or 23 in the section. So if you're starting
that's great.
pretty low, like that's a win.
That makes it a lot more manageable.
Yeah. We recently had a student who started off with an 18 in math and she did the first 31 questions.
That's it.
And then she used the right guessing strategy, which we teach here at Get Smarter Prep. And she ended up with a 25
Really?
in math.
Because she just guessed on the last half.
She did really, really great. I think she missed 2 questions in the first 31.
Yeah.
And then she used a great guessing strategy.
Well, because she had a lot of time.
She had time to slow down and,
Yep,
and
because
do
you're
her
only
best.
doing half the questions, so
Right.
she was focused, and then just the guessing strategy in the last half.
She rocked it. It was pretty awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Good for her.
Kind of fun. And a 25 is fantastic.
It's really great.
I mean, we're talking high 70th percentile.
Yeah.
So
Fantastic.
pretty cool. Anyway, so slow it down, take your time, don't sacrifice those early questions to try to get to the end. There are very, very few students who should be trying to get to all 60 questions.
Right.
Even if you're shooting for 30, you can shoot for just the first 50 or 55 questions and you're going to be fine.
I like it. Let's do that. Good strategies. All right, next section. Reading.
Yeah, reading. How about that one? So this section is kind of an interesting one. It's 40 questions in 35 minutes. Students are given 4 completely unrelated passages. I mean, completely unrelated. It can be prose fiction, which is always the first passage, or sometimes they call it literary narrative.
Okay.
And then you get to your last section, which is natural science. Very, very different, right?
Very different.
They're typically like 90 to 100 lines long, mostly contained on a single page. And then you have 10 questions per passage there.
And students kind of trip up on this section with the timing, right? Because they want to read the passage and then read the questions, and they have to go back to the passage to find, the answer that they're looking for.
Yeah.
And that takes up so much time.
It really does.
You only have 35 minutes.
You only have 35 minutes for all 40 questions and reading through the passages and all that. So students can really get crunched for time here. And again, they fall for the trap of I need to try to get to the end, in which case they're rushing through things, making very bad decisions on answer choices that they just probably don't make a lot of sense if you had more time. And then they don't get the score that they want, right?
Yeah, right.
So again, the idea that we talked about earlier with math, the accuracy over completion, applies to this section as well, science, which we'll get to in a bit. equally, right? It's not about getting to every question. It's about getting as many questions correct as possible.
Had I known that, I probably would have gotten a 36. Kidding.
I love the confidence.
Kidding. No, I'm totally
really
kidding. No, but I mean, I had no idea when I took the test once as a junior without any prep.
Right.
Because that's what you did back in the day. You just go and you take the test and you figure, you have to get every question, go through every question. You always run out of time. Yeah. You don't feel good about your answers. They're not correct for, some of them, a chunk of them, because you're rushed.
You're just flying through it, right?
Yeah, you are.
So, again, we recommend, first of all, because everybody has timing issues, I don't mean everybody. 95% of students have troubles with timing in math, reading, and or science. Well, your score is based upon how you do compared to your peers. So if everybody's having issues with timing, really it's a huge wash. Who cares?
Okay.
So now let's really dig into what matters. And that's getting those questions right. So in reading, we want students to find the passages that they are performing better on.
Okay.
Everybody has their own preferences or strengths and weaknesses.
That makes sense.
Maybe that prose fiction seems beautiful and wonderful because it's kind of like the literature that students are learning in school. But maybe they take 2 minutes longer on that passage compared to the other 3, and maybe their accuracy is not quite as good.
So that's not their passage.
Skip it.
Right.
Right. And that's, I would venture to say 80 to 90% of students fall in that category.
Really?
They should be skipping that first passage, which is a trap, right? It's the first
that
passage,
feels so
question
wrong.
1 through 10.
Yes.
Of course I start with question 1. Where else do I begin, right?
Right.
Not there on the ACT
Start with
reading
question 11,
section, right?
obviously.
Let's focus in on those other passages.
That's bizarre.
We can find a little bit more success, get 2 more questions, and probably be more accurate along the way.
Yeah, I love that.
Again, going back to what we talked about with scoring, you could get half the questions correct and still be at that 20-21 mark on the reading section. So
average.
You don't have to do all of them. Most students should probably be focused on about 3 passages.
Okay.
Right? And instead of 8 minutes and 45 seconds per passage. Now you have 11 plus minutes per passage. You can really slow it down. Make sure you're reading carefully. And remember, the questions are way more important than the passage itself.
Yep. Going into those questions, the reading section covers vocab and context, the main point, the big picture, tone, line reference, lead word, and comparing the passages.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so I feel like some of those are going to be pretty easy.
Yeah, some of
line
them are
reference,
kind of overlapping, right? Like the vocab and context are actually more specialized line reference type questions. So that's where the test makers are saying, hey, on line 14, the author says this, what do they mean? Well, you don't have to have read the entire passage to know what that means.
You can go straight to line 14.
Right. You dig in, and again, we talk about window of opportunity around here. So you're reading a few lines above and a few lines below, but I promise the answer's right there.
Okay.
So it's, again, just knowing how to approach it. Yep. Different than in school, right? In school, we're focused on the theme, the plot, the character development, the tone, all those big picture ideas. Well, anywhere from 3 to 6 questions on an ACT reading section have to do with that. So you're focusing on 10% of the tests.
Yeah. When
90% is something totally different.
What? That's crazy.
So we do approach a section differently, and little precursor, foreshadowing. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is right now, but we actually, for most students, 98% of students, we don't recommend that they read the passages in the reading section.
That feels
which
so
is
weird.
Kind of crazy, kind of weird. But again, it helps us focus on getting questions correct. For instance, those line reference questions. If you've read the whole passage, did you remember exactly what happened on line 14? No. So you have to go back and reread that again anyway.
Right. So you're kind of wasting a little bit of time there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me about lead word. So
lead word are, once a student kind of understands the grasp of the concepts of what's actually being tested and the strategy that we offer here at Get Smarter Prep, lead word questions actually become as easy as line reference questions because they're guiding us to a specific point in each passage. So if they are, let's say it's a passage about U.S. presidents, and one of the questions asks about James Garfield.
Yep.
I always loved James Garfield because I loved Garfield.
Garfield, the cat.
The cat,
yeah.
Lasagna.
It's on again.
Is it?
On Netflix.
I think I saw
have a new one.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's obviously not as good as the old ones.
Clearly. I used to read those comic books nonstop as a kid.
Yeah.
Oh man, those were great.
Weren't they in the Sunday newspaper as well?
Yeah.
A comic strip?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do remember.
Do you remember getting a newspaper?
I do.
Do you still get a newspaper?
I don't.
No.
My dad does.
Okay.
Yeah, and he reads it every morning.
Oh, that's sweet.
It is sweet.
Very traditional.
Fun.
Okay, anyway. James Garfield.
So James Garfield,
The president.
again, he's only going to be mentioned one spot in the entire passage. You can skim and find that lead word. Like James Garfield is a name that's going to pop off the page. We find that, we read that little part. I promise again, we have the answer.
Yeah, okay.
So it's just kind of identifying what those lead words are. Sometimes they're obvious like that. Sometimes they're maybe not quite as clear cut, and we just have to kind of learn how to identify those words.
So I feel like in the reading section, you could really improve your score quickly, right? If you know how to identify those couple things. And
I would actually say that reading section is the one that probably takes the most practice and the time.
Okay.
Like English, like, hey, we're going to learn some concrete ways to approach these punctuation questions. And if you do that every time, you're going to clean those up immediately.
Okay.
Right? Reading is one where we're going to learn the new strategy, the new approach. We may make some tweaks along the way for each individual student and how they should be approaching it. But it takes time. Like, it's not something in 2 or 3 weeks you're going to be really good at that. Right?
More
like
time
maybe
than
some
that,
of that English. Like most students need anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks to get really, really good at that reading strategy.
Okay.
So
quite a bit of work.
Absolutely.
They can do it.
Absolutely.
They can do it. Last section.
How about that science?
Science.
Yay. You love science, right?
Yep. 40 questions, 35 minutes. So same as the reading section, right?
Yeah, set up almost exactly the same. Except for instead of 4 passages, now students have 6 passages with anywhere from 6 to 7 questions per passage.
Okay.
All right. So in school, we wouldn't find a lot of similarities between our literature classes and thinking back to our chem class.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no.
We don't think a lot about those, a lot of similarities between those, but on
Right.
ACT, these 2 sections are pretty much the same.
Just interrupt. Can you just compare like your reading, like your lit teacher to like your science teacher in high school? Like just
Okay.
their personalities, how
Yeah.
different they are.
Mrs. Crumley and Mrs. McGee. Yeah.
But, like, think about-
They'd be good friends, I think.
Oh, they would?
I think they'd be good friends because they'd be like opposites.
Opposites,
right?
yeah. But they're
Kinda
just so
awesome.
like in high school they're so opposite, but here on the ACT,
They're so similar.
yes.
And the approach is we need to approach them in the same way, right? Like in that reading section, we weren't reading for the big picture. Like we weren't trying to understand every word because most of that is completely pointless, right? Here in the science section, it's easy to get sucked in and do the wrong thing and trying to understand. But the test makers aren't expecting a student to become a physicist in the 5 minutes with a physics passage. That's crazy world,
If that
right?
were the case, everyone would be a physicist.
That everyone would be.
Maybe.
Oh man, I just imagine like Spartacus, but with physics. I'm a physicist. That's so weird. Anyway, so again, that's not the point. The point is to get those 6 questions correct in those 5 minutes, right? So we can easily distract ourselves and just forget what the test is about, and it's about getting those questions right. So it's kind of start boiling it down, narrowing it down, find the right pieces, get rid of all that other junk that's completely unnecessary for that question, and then make sure we're reading that question carefully, of course.
Right. So it covers paragraph, increase, decrease, charts, graphs, logic, comparing passages, main point and big picture. I feel like I'm saying the same thing as I did in reading, right?
It's kind of the same ideas, exactly.
Yeah.
So you notice, like, we don't break up our questions. So those are the categories that we break the test up into. We don't have chemistry, biology, earth science, physics, astronomy.
I feel like that's what it should be.
There are passages that address all of those topics, but it's not that content. There will be 1, maybe 2 questions that are actually, like, they require some science knowledge, right? The rest, it's all right there on the page for us. So a student could literally get a 35 or 36 not knowing any science
That
if they approach it in the right way.
Is crazy.
It is kind of crazy world, right? So again, it's about just identifying the question, what they're really trying to get us to look at, and then really just finding that information.
Yeah.
Like I think of that game as a kid. Did you ever play Memory?
Yeah, of
Like
course.
those cards are all turned upside down, and you flip one over and you got to find its match, right? It's kind of that same thing here in the science section. Like maybe you have no idea what these units are. Maybe you don't know what an ohm is, right? In physics. Well, a lot of people don't. A lot of students don't take physics in high school, especially as freshmen, sophomores, or juniors.
Oh, right, exactly.
In which case, now I just need to match the sign, the symbol, to something in the passage, right?
Okay.
Just it can can be that easy. I promise.
So you can figure it out. I mean, these are things that you can figure out without knowing
Absolutely.
how to do it.
Right. It's basically a big reading charts and graphs section.
Okay.
And there isn't a school in the country that offers a reading charts and graphs class in high school. So
What?
So it can feel pretty new and different, but it really is a section that is something that students can master. They just have to, again, practice and know how to approach it.
Right, exactly.
And that kind of, again, this is nerdy. I may have said this on a previous one, but I don't subscribe to practice makes perfect, right? Right. If
Usually,
you do something,
I mean, that's what it is.
everybody
That's
says,
what-
right?
Yeah.
But I don't subscribe to practice makes perfect, because you can practice something the wrong way, and then how are you going to do it in the long run? You're going to do it the wrong way.
Right.
Right.
Because that's the way you've practiced.
That's the way you've practiced. So I subscribe to perfect practice makes perfect. So I don't, for instance, when I'm working with a student, I don't assign a ton of homework right off the bat, because they just don't know how to do all of the questions yet.
That makes sense.
So as we get into a tutorial, students have learned more material and more content. That's when I kind of load them up with extra homework there toward the middle and end. Not so much at the beginning, because it's about learning those techniques and knowing how to approach the test to begin with.
Yeah.
So.
Easing them into a little bit. I like it. Now, there's a section that a lot of people kind of forget about, right? We've covered English, math, reading, and science.
Yeah.
What about the writing portion of the test?
Oh, that writing section. So there are still a few schools across the country that require it. And for the most part, it's going to be highly selective schools where they just want as many good data points to compare all these amazing students to one another. But if you're looking at kind of local state school or local private school, like, they're not going to require the writing section. So don't worry too much about it. But the one caveat, the one thing that I really want to push here is make sure that if you don't have a good set of schools, if you don't have a school list already going, and you know exactly, like, hey, these are the 8 that I'm definitely applying to, and that's it, right? We encourage you to take that writing section, because the last thing we want students to do is get into senior year and they hear about this new school, their friends are talking about it, and oh my gosh, it's a perfect match. Like, that's my dream school that you're talking about right there. Right. But they require the writing section, and you haven't taken the writing section. Because what do you have to do then? One of two things.
Retake the whole ACT.
Yeah, that's option 1. Option 2, also not fun. You just can't even consider that school. You have to take it off your list right off the bat.
Yeah.
So if you are unsure about what schools you're interested in, make sure you go ahead and take that writing section.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not going to hurt too much. And it's a 40-minute section. Basically, they give you a topic with different perspectives, and you kind of write your own feel on that, and kind of analyze those other perspectives.
And that does not go into your overall score, ACT score.
No, good question. So they give you a score between 2 and 12 in that section. It does not impact your composite score at all. And the composite is just made up of your English, math, reading, and science.
Okay.
But it does impact your silly ELA score. So when you get your score report, you'll have a STEM score and an ELA score, and those are just those hot terms that high schools in particular really love.
Right.
They don't mean anything, because college admissions won't use either one.
Okay.
So don't worry about those.
So take the writing portion.
And then the last thing I think we should do is just kind of briefly compare the ACT to its counterpart, the SAT, right? Colleges will accept both equally, so it doesn't matter which one we take. Here at ACT, here at Get Smarter Prep.
GSP. There's so many ACT,
There's
SAT,
so many acronyms.
GSP.
I'm so thrown off.
I know.
Here at GSP, most of our students coming through are focused on the ACT. Some of it is regional, but some of it is also with the SAT and College Board making the changes that they did a few years ago. It's just been a little bit more challenging to find good material to prepare with, and score improvements have tended to be a little bit higher with that ACT. So, but sometimes that SAT is the right fit for a student. So let's kind of briefly talk about kind of what's covered on the SAT. The first thing that students do, they walk in and they take the reading section. And on the ACT, it was 35 minutes, 40 questions. Now we're walking into a test where we have 65 minutes and 52 questions.
So they're getting a lot more time.
A lot more time per question. And that's kind of the general theme throughout the entire SATs. You have more time per question. Now with that comes one, very few students have troubles with timing. So that's not something that we can kind of correct, right?
Right.
We now have to really, really, really focus on the content.
Yep.
And 2, the way that they approach questions and they ask questions can be pretty tricky, right?
Different than the ACT.
Very different than the ACT. And what they're demanding of their students is just different.
Okay.
So it's a different skill set, a different approach. We have to get to every question to get the score that we're wanting.
So it's a little bit harder to pick up the points.
Yeah, I would generally say that, personally.
What if a student is really, really good in math?
Yeah, so there are 2 math sections to the SAT. There's one without a calculator.
No, thank you.
Usually students don't love that section, but generally it's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
The ACT and SAT, most people don't know this, but the ACT and SAT are actually created so that you don't need a calculator for any question. But it's a tool, like if you have a tool, like why would you not use it? Right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to go shovel with my hands.
No.
That would be crazy world.
Right.
So again, we want students to use their calculators when allowed.
Yes.
But the SAT has a no calculator section and then a longer calculator section.
Okay.
Right? And it's covering some of the same topics as the ACT with geometry and algebra 1, algebra 2, a little bit of trigonometry. But again, their approach is just a little bit different.
Okay. And 50% of the test is going to be math.
Yeah. So there are 4 sections to that SAT and 2 of them are math. So it's weighted a little bit more heavily, right? Half of your score is your math score, whereas on the ACT makes up a quarter of your score.
Yeah, 1/4.
So.
Yep. And then 25% reading.
25% is that reading section, that first one. And then the second section of the test is actually that writing and language section. It actually mirrors the English section of the ACT pretty closely.
Yeah, because I feel like that's confusing because you're saying now we have an essay, but there's a writing and language section. So I feel like it's a little muddled.
Yeah, so pre-2015, 16, somewhere in there, the SAT actually had it was called the writing section, and half of that score was multiple choice and half of it was the essay. Well, they got rid of that extra 800 points, so now it's back to the 1600 scale.
Yep.
And now they have a writing and language section, which is covering the multiple choice, and then they have the optional essay that students can take.
So they changed it up a little bit.
They changed it up.
And the essay is a 50-minute essay instead of a 40-minute essay, so you get a little bit more time.
Yeah, and a little bit more technical, probably a little bit more what students would expect from like a test in school or writing an essay for school, especially if they are in like AP classes or IB classes, things like that.
Okay,
so
very good.
Very good.
Anything else to compare the ACT and the SAT?
No, they're fairly comparable in time and length. The ACT is maybe a little bit longer. If you throw in that essay or the writing section on the ACT to both exams, they're roughly the same time. So not a huge concern there. Okay.
Well, if you have any questions figuring out whether your student should be taking the ACT or the SAT, we are here to help you. Please give us a call or go to our website. We would love to help. We want to wish all of our students happy ACT test day this Saturday, so April 13th.
Yeah, good luck, everybody.
Good luck to everyone who's taking the test. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Yeah.
What's not to love?
Let your horn shine.
Oh, that's scary.
Glitter that up.
So scary.
That's weird.
Anyway, just have a good day, maybe. See you next time.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Simply Smarter podcast with Caleb and Jill. If you like our show and want to know more, check out our blog at getsmarterprep.com or subscribe to the podcast to hear us talk about all things ACT related. Join us next week as we discuss how to manage expectations when it comes to standardized testing.